Welcome to the Project Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Gorey, mom of a sweet baby girl and an ever-evolving entrepreneur. On this show, we will explore the intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. We will share stories of moms just like you and me with the goal of fostering community and comfort in knowing that we are not alone in our experiences. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to ensure you get all the updated episodes and releases. Welcome to today's episode of the Project Mom Podcast. Today, I am talking with Andrea Bombino, who is a Motherhood Center career coach, as she helps women align their career aspirations alongside motherhood. She created Made to Mother to do just this. It's a business that empowers women with the tools necessary to navigate the modern workplace and helps businesses create and roll out parental leave programs. Welcome. Andrea, I'm so happy that you're here and that we got to connect and get this on the books, because I think you touch on two very critical pieces of how we align and how we work in our current workplace, right? It's like, as individuals, we are our own biggest advocates, but you also touch on the other piece of the puzzle that we don't really have influence on, right? It's like the businesses that tell us what our work days look like, that tell us what our benefits look like, that tell us what's acceptable as an employee of their company. So thank you for being here and for doing this work. It is so important.
Thank you so much for having me on, Emily. And I'm so glad that that message has really resonated with you. I feel like the more we talk about this, the more we talk about what is actually within our own individual or household control versus what the workplace sets forth as the standard for us versus what society expects of us in our Western culture. Like, we have to have these conversations if we want to make some changes that are going to impact us and future generations.
Yeah, it's truly incredible when you think about, because I think sometimes people get overwhelmed by that. It's like there's a level of control, like you said, on the individual, right? There's only so much within our households that perhaps we can influence. And then there's sometimes a level of overwhelm of, this feels like this is the society that we are living in. And I don't know as an individual how I can help impact that or change that. Do you find that that resonates with you in terms of the work that you're doing with businesses as well as the women that you're working with from a coaching perspective?
Yes, 100%. I'd kind of describe it from a perspective of like, once you know, it's really hard to stick your head back in the sand and pretend like everything is fine. And the more research you do on our society and the systems that we either do or don't have in place, the more you find that it's hard to ignore. And most people's first reaction is actually anger. It's anger at, like, why is it set up this way? Why can't I do anything? I want to help, but I'm just one person. You know how many times I've heard that? Like, I am just one person.
Sure.
But there are a lot of things that we can do just by having the conversation and opening it up amongst ourselves, right? Being curious for ourselves to say, like, why is this making me angry? Why is it making me feel overwhelmed? What is it that I want to change? How do I want to change it? And how can I kind of make little tiny tweaks for myself to actually almost like be a rebel to the way that motherhood and the workplace for mothers is structured today? And then, every time you have a conversation with a significant other or a friend or a family member or a colleague, that is spreading the message. It's kind of like motherhood as a form of resistance. So when you choose to mother or work a particular way, you then become an activist. And it doesn't have to be that you're literally marching in the streets, but it can be something like leaving the workplace at the end of the day and saying, hey, I'm leaving early because I have to pick up my child from daycare, right? And not trying to hide that part of your identity and pretend like you're somebody that doesn't have a child or kids. So really kind of owning it. So there could be little like acts of rebellion or activism that we put into place day to day that help minimize the feeling of overwhelm and increase the feeling of like, well, I can only be responsible for myself and the household to a certain extent. So how can we do these little things to kind of feel like we're moving forward?
Yeah. I want to dive into something that you just said right there before we get into your story, just because it's such a great nugget right now. The part that you say in terms of these acts of resistance that we can put forth just as an individual in our own identities in this workplace. And that could be as simple as leaving right at 5 o'clock, to go pick up your child from daycare. What do you say to those women who perhaps don't feel that they have that flexibility or that space to do so at work? Because I think there's probably within the workplace as it currently stands, the one that you're trying to kind of make the changes within, there's still a lot of companies out there that don't really accept that necessarily, or for women to move ahead or get further along in their career or get those promotions, or perhaps are some negative consequences that come along with some of those assertions of having to leave to take care of own personal needs or family needs and things of that nature. I mean, so has that come up in a lot of the conversations that you've had with your clients? And how do we give ourselves permission to stand up for ourselves in those scenarios when knowing that perhaps it goes against maybe some of the career goals that we have? I'm hitting you with it hard. I'm like, we're not even ramping up. We're just going
that's
for
all right.
it.
That's okay. I love talking about this stuff. I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face. So the first part, in terms of like the question you asked around like, well, what if a woman feels like, that type of flexibility is not afforded to her in her workplace, or if the workplace is, I like to say, more traditional, aka old fashioned, aka old school, and doesn't actually, it's not built for women or working moms, really. And when I say working moms, like, to me, all mothers work, whether they are stay-at-home mothers or they are part of the paid labor workforce. But for now, let's just assume that for me, when I say working moms in this conversation, I'm talking about paid labor, talking about household duties and caretaking for families. Being paid is a whole nother topic of conversation that I can rant about. So I won't here. But the first thing is, like, when I work with women, a lot of the times as they're planning to go on maternity leave, whether usually with their first or their second child, or as they're planning on returning from work, or ideally through that entire process of planning for the leave while they're in that maternity leave period, and as they prepare to come back. And there is a really, really big part of the women that I work with that by the time they're getting ready to come back, they're really hesitant about going back to that workforce or to that particular job, because they know the expectation of their level of work, their output, their production is at X, and that no longer aligns with what they want to do. Now, the thing is that so often they come to me and they're like, I need to look for a new job. I need to find a new company. The company that I've been working at is just not aligned with my priorities now in this stage of life. Now, while that is sometimes the case, the reality is that there are a lot of workplaces that are just not built for mothers, right? And so from a corporate perspective, companies are starting to make changes to attract and retain parents. Parents make up a big, big part of the workforce. And women make up, about 50% of the workforce as well. Reshma Shujani, who is the founder of Girls Who Code, wrote this brilliant book called Pay Up that was released a few months ago. She talks about like reimagining the future of work for women and mothers, and really having to change the way that the workplaces are structured. And one of the biggest challenges that I see right now is that when it comes to, if you work for a company that allows for work from home, especially in a post-COVID or mid-COVID era, depending on how you want to look at it, companies that are not affording that flexibility are losing a lot of talent. But the reality is that these companies that are also reporting on who is taking the opportunity to work from home, even if you have moms and dads, moms tend to take that time. What they miss out on are those cooler conversations, right? Those run-ins going for coffee, or when you see somebody that you haven't seen in a while and they say, hey, we're actually going out for drinks after work. Do you want to come to happy hour with us? And the people that tend to be there are people in positions of power or influence. And so a lot of the times when women are opting to stay working from home, they miss out on those casual conversations. And so some of the things that I do with my corporate clients is, how can we create those conversations and community to foster those opportunities? Because it's not really fair that whoever decides to work from home, for whatever reason they decide to do that, that they should be penalized from a career progression perspective. So the first thing I always say, like when women come to me and say, like, I need to quit my job, it's like, well, is it the job? Is it the company? Or is it something else? Do we need to start having the conversations in the workplace around what it is that you want to be doing? I've helped women quite a few times craft new roles for themselves, which a lot of the times people are like, that's not possible. Now, granted, is that possible in a 5-person business? Maybe, maybe not. But when I work with women, it's really about how can we get creative? How can we look at your values from a more feminine perspective? And when I say feminine perspective, I mean through the lens of motherhood. I mean through the lens of emotion and how you want to feel versus these black and white traditional SMART goals, right? It's like, all right, make a goal. And it's like, it should be based on your values, but your values are like, they're black and white. And it's like, no, they're not.
Right.
They're evolving. And a big thing about the workplace, especially in the US, is that expectation that even if you take maternity leave, you're going to come back the same person. And even if you do want to come back to produce the same or even better than you've ever performed before, it doesn't take into the consideration that you may be treated differently by your peers. It also means that a lot of the times there are financial implications when you've taken maternity leave. There are implications around pay cycles, so pay raise considerations. Did you miss out on that cycle? Same thing with promotions, same thing with big projects and being the one who is chosen to lead them. So it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You take the leave, if you even have it, and the whole time you think, what am I missing? Are they going to forget about me? Are they going to take me seriously when I come back? Like, who am I? Do I even want to be here? I hate this place. I used to love this place. Why don't I like it anymore? What's wrong with me? And we put it on ourselves as like, it's us. We're the problem. 9 times out of 10, women will say to me, I'm the problem. And I'm like, well, you're not. It's actually, the workplace is not designed for us. If you think of like the traditional Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, like, how does that take into consideration school drop-offs, school pickups, pumping, breastfeeding, any of that? It just doesn't. It really, really doesn't. And so when you mentioned earlier, like, you know, that permission factor, that permission starts with ourselves. It starts with recognizing that the way that our society is set up in the US in particular is not set up for mothers. We do not value the work of mothers. It is unpaid labor. And to expect women, especially women who are part of that paid labor force, to mother like they don't have careers and to work like they don't have children at home is asinine. You know, but we do it. We expect that of ourselves. And like, my greatest fear when I got pregnant while I was working at LinkedIn in Australia was, how the hell am I going to continue to be the career woman I have always aspired to be while being a mother? And a big part of that was that I didn't have a whole lot of examples of women that had young children that were in the office. LinkedIn already had a flexible work policy before COVID hit. So at the time I was like, the ones with the young kids, they work from home. I never really see them. They're never there for the happy hours. They're never there for the team things. They're missing out. And then the ones that had kids that were a little bit older, I felt like a lot of the times they really tried to, unless you were one-on-one with them, like grabbing that cup of coffee or running into them while getting, you know, your fancy seltzer water at the cooler, like you didn't really necessarily know that they had kids. And unfortunately for me, most of like some of the worst experiences I've had in my professional career in my last 13 years were actually on the receiving end of other women and women in management, women that felt like, well, they had to fight so hard to get to the top. Like, they're not going to let anybody else get in there, instead of the, hey, I've gotten here. Let me, you know, putting out a hand saying, let me show you the ropes that I took to get here. Those have been, unfortunately, fewer and farther between for me in my own personal journey.
Yeah. And I want to get into that journey because I think to get to a level of awareness that you have, there's so many experiences that lend itself to that. And I want to just quickly touch on something that you mentioned before we dive into that, of like recognizing that we can get creative, that if we don't ask, we'll never know, right? So it's like 100%. To be creative or to be our own best advocates in recognizing that after becoming moms, we are rightfully so different human beings. The process in which we go through, the physical changes, the emotional changes, the expectations that we put on ourselves, the pressure we have on ourselves from these, like, you know, stories and narratives and traditional roles that we've seen growing up, all play a factor in this. And if we're not our own biggest advocate and we don't ask, we'll never know. I think there's so much value in that, and being able to say, well, right now it's just not working for me. What do I have to lose? Can I ask for this creative opportunity, this new role, which I also find is our roles are not actually there for us the same as they were, right? Companies have this legal aspect to say you will have a role or something of similar nature for you. We can't even promise you that your job will be, this exact job will be here for you. So why can't we have the same permissions to say that job actually doesn't work for me anymore either? This is what I'm needing, and just putting it out there, right? What is possible? What are my opportunities? And perhaps can't be any worse than going back to something we don't want to do.
I think you've made some really, really great points there. And one of the things that I want to touch on is like, you kind of asked this rhetorical question around like, why don't we want to make the change, or why don't we want to admit that like it no longer fits? And in my experience, I'm first generation American, right? My parents really drilled education into me as like the way that was going to get our family into this level of like that American dream. And so for me, like studying to be like an A student, and, you know, trying to always be on the honor roll and on the dean's list when I went to college, and to graduate with honors, which by the way, no one asked me about when I went through the interview process ever, right? Nobody ever asked me my GPA. And I was like, why did I spend all that time at the library, like killing myself, bending over backwards? And the reality is that when I got to the point where I went back to LinkedIn from my maternity leave, and I took maternity leave in Australia, where LinkedIn pays for about 4.5 months, but you can take up to a year to 2 years in Australia. And in year one, they have to hold your exact job. And in 2 years, they just have to guarantee that you have a place to go back to within that company. But it's very expected that if you have the option to take longer leave, people do it, especially if you can afford to do it. And so I was really lucky that my manager, who's actually a guy who had 3 of his own kids, was the one who pushed me to take the year. I didn't want to. I was freaked out. Again, being American, I didn't know anybody that had ever taken like a 2-week-long vacation consecutively, let alone a year of maternity leave.
Yeah.
Right. So I like the day after I found out I got promoted is the day I found out I was pregnant. And I was so freaked out. And so to fast forward through the pregnancy and through my maternity leave, and then going back to LinkedIn, and then launching my own business while I'd been on leave and running it at the same time on the side, it got to the point where I was like, would I actually, quote unquote, throw away my entire professional career to become an entrepreneur, to work for myself?
Yeah.
And it freaked me out because, like, you know, there were some people that I spoke to, friends and family, they're like, this is crazy. You know, you've worked so hard. You worked on Wall Street. You did all of these things. You've worked with global companies. And now you're just going to try to do this on your own. And like, who cares about women at work? Like, they're just women. They're just moms at work. Like, that doesn't have to change. And I just felt that I knew that I wasn't the only one that felt different. For me, it was at the moment that I found out I was pregnant. That's when things started to change for me. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of matrescence, this whole concept of becoming a mother, the psychological and the physical and the sociological changes. Like, it doesn't just impact like what size jeans we wear after pregnancy and birth, right? It impacts things like our career and our perception of who we are and the value that we bring to the workplace. It impacts our economic standing, right? Are we earning while we're on maternity leave? Are we taking a cut in our pay? Do we have somebody else at home that can also help to support from a financial perspective? If you've always been financially independent, that's a huge hit to your economic standing and to your ego, in my personal experience. So it's like, these are things that we're not often talking about. And so for me, I was like, well, I know if I'm feeling this, that other people have to be feeling it as well. And I just started asking the questions. And, you know, this expectation, like, not everybody changes in the same way. Some people love pregnancy. Some people hate it. Some people have great birth experiences. Some have not so good experiences. Some people can't wait to go back to the workplace, and other ones absolutely do not want to go back to what they used to do at all. Every experience is individual, but we have to recognize that motherhood is not a one size fits all, and motherhood and career, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. But why are we just kind of pushing it under the rug and saying like, just come back to work, you're the same, you know? Oh, you want some flexible hours? Take some flexible hours. What if you don't want the flexibility, right? What if you want to work your ass off because you actually just prefer that? That's cool too. But either way, we're oftentimes limiting women and mothers by telling them and putting them in a box of like, this is what's expected of you now that you're a mother. When in reality, what businesses should be asking and what employees should be asking themselves is like, what do I want now? Has anything changed? What has changed? And like you said
Mm,
before, like getting creative about their role, about their responsibilities, about what it is that they want to do, because we don't have to sit in the box that we've been put in. We can
yeah.
step out of that. And for most companies, I mean, there are some roles and companies where it's more difficult than others, but for the most
Yeah.
part, we do have some of that flexibility to kind of question what's going on.
Yeah. The piece that you said of career and motherhood, they really function similarly in parallels, right? We can always make a different choice. We can
Mm,
always recognize that things are evolving and our place in each of these identities is constantly changing based on all these different experiences that are coming to us. So I think the thought, and I say this quite a bit, is like we always have permission to make a different choice. And it's the
mm,
life that we're living and no one else is living it. So how can we make it something that we are happy to show up in every day? And you said it too, right? It's like I think about my personal experience of this podcast came out of a desire to use my brain in a little bit of a different way than just being at home with my daughter. And I found myself having a level of resentment when I was home with her. I still am a full time stay at home mom. And it's a progression of asking for help and what that help looks like so I can transition into some periods of my day where I can use my brain a little bit differently, have these conversations, and mother a little bit that guilt or that shame that I have of still wanting to be in this other channel and this other facet,
yes.
because it's to grapple between the two. I feel like they're always little birdies in your ears. It's like, okay, I have a million things to be doing at home. Oh, I have a million things I want to be doing on this podcast. And it's like realizing that we can make some changes and adapt things as we learn what we want and get more clear on what we want is so critical in both facets of our lives, career and motherhood.
Yeah. And I think that like your observation around like these little birds around your head that are kind of always telling you, they're the shoulds,
Yeah.
right? Telling
Oh,
you how you
oh,
should be spending your time, how you should interact with
yeah.
your daughter, how you should think about your career, all the things you should be doing. And
Yeah.
this is something that comes up daily in the conversations that I have with mothers. And a big part of that is like, it's about examining our expectation that we had before we became a mother and our existing expectation of mothers and motherhood. But it's also
Mm-hmm.
redefining the definition of success that we have for ourselves and our careers, whether that career is as a stay at home mom. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also an aspect of like valuing motherhood as its own career, as its own responsibility. That's where I think a big part of American culture and Australian culture really kind of falls down. Like, because it is unpaid labor, because we have all these memes on social media about moms doing laundry and drinking wine and hanging out at Target to get a break from the kids.
Yeah.
And like, it becomes a really negative story. And so when you ask kids that are in their late teens right now, early 20s, like, do you want to be a mother? There's something like, I think the New York Times last week or 2 weeks ago reported like 80 something percent are saying, no, thank you. They don't want to
Right.
be parents. And it's like, yeah, of course, we're not glamorizing it. And I'm not saying that we have to, that it needs to be rainbows and butterflies. It's not. It's freaking hard. It's really,
Yeah.
really, really hard. It is mentally, emotionally, physically challenging. It's all of those things, financially challenging too.
Yeah.
And so if we start to say out loud, like, I value my role as a mother, I value my contribution, but for me, being a good mother is taking time for myself. I love being away from my daughter. I said this on a
Yeah.
call last night that I was on, and I kid you not, like one of the other women said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you just said that out loud." She's like, "I'm secretly like thrilled that you said it, but I'm also like appalled that you said it, but I'm still so happy that somebody else has said it." And I'm like, I'm not a unicorn, right? Like,
Yeah.
I love my daughter. I love her more than anything. But for me to be the type of mother that I want to be, that
Yeah.
means I need time to myself. I carved out time for a run this morning. I will make time to read tonight. I have a hobby that I've taken up in the last few weeks of like learning how to do, like how to paint in watercolors that I'm just teaching myself through YouTube. That
I
is
love
because
that.
I'm carving out that time. And it's like, I have a very supportive husband. He is a true partner, but we are constantly working on the lines of communication around like, who does what in our household, who does what in our family. How can we share that load? I'm a huge fan of Eve Brodsky and her book Fair Play and of the Fair Play
Mm,
cards. My husband and I sat down and we dealt the cards out last night, and we talked about, all right, this is what it's going to look like for the next week. Let's make a few changes as I try to get my business really, really up and running through the end of this year. And
yeah.
so it's like, if I have these goals, I can't do all of these other little things at home, but I still want to make some time for myself. I want to make sure that there's time for my husband and I want to make sure that I get good quality time with my daughter. So
Yeah.
it's this constant reevaluation and this permission of saying to myself, like, I can change my mind. I
Yeah.
don't know why we think that once we make a decision that it has to be that way, especially if we run our own businesses. We kill
Yep.
ourselves like trying to act like it's a corporate business. But in reality, we're our own bosses. And it's like, wait, I started
Right.
my business to have more flexibility, and yet I'm working more hours, crazier hours, going
Yep.
above and beyond for my clients, which right now for this season that I'm in and for the help and support I have around me, I can do. But that's not
Yes.
always the case. It hasn't always been the case, and it's not always going to be the case. And so it's that constant reassessment.
I love what you said too, right? It's this season that we're in right now because there's always going to be new challenges, new goals, new aspirations that we have when we're in a partnership as well, right? That we also have to balance our partner's goals and aspirations, the aspirations of our kids as they get older and have, the abilities to explore new things. I think this seasons change rather quickly if we're not always evaluating them. And we get to a point, I think, where overwhelm shows up and we
Yes.
get to a point where I think things snap or we feel like we're dropping balls and we're not good enough and we can't do all of these things. And I think it could be really quite powerful if we just take a moment and pause and say, maybe we just have to reevaluate this season. And that's it. Just
Yes.
like what conversations can be had with your partner, with yourself, that things need to be reprioritized. And it's really quite beautiful when you put it that way because it doesn't feel like forever. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because the first year of my daughter's life, and for those who have been listening through all of these episodes, I've heard this before of like, the first year was so hard for me because I had this expectation that this was it
Mm.
forever. This was the thing I chose. This was the role that I chose, and that this is it forever. She's 18 months now. I look back on her year birthday and I'm starting to come out of the fog and I'm like, okay, there was probably some level of depression or anxiety in there because
Mm.
those thoughts were so heavy. But coming out of it, right, it's like I'm able to see that those changes can be made. My husband and I had some conversations around like today for me to do this interview. He's like, I'll put her down for a nap. He works from home on Mondays. It's really quite beautiful to say, like, let me just jump in here and
Yes.
receive the help, because the
Yes.
other half of that is being able to receive that and say, I recognize that I don't need to do it all.
A hundred
Why else do we
percent.
have partners? And we're not
Yeah.
lucky to have these partners. This is how it is. Like, we don't have to be lucky and thankful that we have these amazing partners at home. They're dads, they're moms. They
Yeah.
chose
Yeah.
to show up.
Yeah.
They chose to be
Yeah.
here also.
Yeah. So since we've moved back to the US about 4 months ago, we moved for my husband's job. And so he's Australian. And I loved living in Australia, and being there for 5 years was amazing, amazing. And like, while I love my friends and family here, I really wanted to stay in Australia. So coming back, it was like, all right, well, if we're going to live in the US, let's live near my parents in Jersey, but we've got to be near Manhattan. So it was this like amazing opportunity that we had because my mom decided that she would watch our daughter 4 days a week,
That's
Monday through
amazing.
Thursday, so that
Yep.
my husband, Matt, and I could work from home. We both work remotely. And so it's amazing because my mom is old school Colombian American. And so she's just like, oh, Cookie, do you want me to make you some dinner tonight? And I'll leave it on the stove so that you guys don't have to deal with it later. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. But when I was in Australia for the first almost 2 years of my daughter's life, and people would offer to drop something off or to do something, like especially when we were in lockdowns, I was like, no, 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 we've got it, we've got it, we've got it. And I don't know where I came up with this idea that I had to be able to do everything on my own. And maybe part of it is like it feels a bit easier because it is my mother, because we have that
Mm,
relationship. But then she does things where she says, for instance, like last week, I was on a call in the office and my husband was working in another room in the apartment, and he had the door closed in the room that he was in. I had the door closed here, but my mom decided that she would come and tell me, even though Matt actually wasn't on a call. right? And she's like, what's your responsibility? Like the child. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we're both
Yeah.
here. We both work. She's like, yeah, but Matt's working. And I'm like, I'm working too.
Yeah.
Or,
Hello.
if Matt starts pulling out stuff to make dinner while she's still here, she'll be like, oh, it's so nice that you have a husband that cooks. It's so special. And I'm like, well, we
Mm-hmm.
have to eat. So, so it's really interesting because, like I said to my husband, like for me, part of what's difficult is like my own preconceived notion of what it means to be a wife and a woman and a mother in my own Cuban and Colombian heritage. Like it's just this constant responsibility of like taking care of everybody. And I mean, luckily for me, my mom does not exhibit any qualities of like the traditional martyr type mother.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I don't feel bad taking time for myself. Thank God. But there are plenty of other
Yeah.
things where I'm like, what is the expectation and what do other people think I should or shouldn't be doing because I am a
Yeah.
mother? So we're constantly talking about that and questioning that as well.
Yeah. I think it's really quite remarkable when we take a step back and we think about some of those roles that we saw play out for us as
Yes.
we were kids, and just taking a step back and recognizing that there's really nothing wrong with the way that those have been done. That is the way that our parents were taught through their parents and
Yes.
previous generations. So I think there's something to be said for just being aware of how those are playing out and taking from them what works for you in this season and what doesn't work for you and adapting those as you go. A big thing for me was this financial piece too, of saying, for me, it was a huge, loud, very loud narrative of if you make the money, you get the say, you make the choice, you make the decision.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was played out in my childhood. So for the first couple of months, it was like, okay, well, I'm no longer contributing financially. Yet again, right, it goes back to that unpaid labor, because if we were actually getting paid for the work that we were doing in the house, we would probably be right up there in the salary
Yeah.
in terms of that traditionally. But, it was for me, it was like, okay, I'm just going to succumb and support. I'm in a secondary supporting role. So it doesn't have to be that way. So if we can take the step back and be aware of those patterns that are playing, it can be quite liberating for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how often one of the first things that women will usually say to me is like, I'm just really struggling to be a good mom. I'm like, well, what does it mean to
Mm,
be a good mom? Like, tell me, like, what do you think it is? Right. And then a lot of the times, like,
yeah.
she'll list it all out. And then I'm like, so is that realistic? And then they're like, well, I think I may have seen it on Instagram. And I'm like, social
Yeah.
media and the media in general, it's a beautiful place to like build community and to feel like you're not alone and to get a glimpse into other people's lives. It's not always the full picture. You get things like the
Right.
show Working Moms, and I started watching that when I was pregnant, and I had to turn it off because I was like, oh my God, if this is what I've signed up for, this is horrific. I've since gone back to it and I'm like, it sucks, but this is true. Most of this stuff is true.
Yeah.
And the characters that we see portrayed on traditional media, like movies and television and in magazines and so on and so forth,
Mm,
I do think that there are characters that are being made and built now that are changing and are challenging those societal norms. But unfortunately, for the most part, most of America still believes in this tradition of like, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z in order to be considered a good mom. And if you're not a good mom, then you're a bad one. And I don't think
yep.
anybody wakes up ever thinking like, I want to cause emotional stress and trauma for my child, like, or put them
Right.
in harm's way in any way,
Right.
shape, or form. Like, I really struggle to believe that anybody does that on purpose.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because we tend to then put that emotional trauma and stress and harm on ourselves because we're trying to do all of these things in protection of our children and our partners. And at the end of the day, like if they're physically safe, like sometimes that's just the best that we can do some days, right? And it's like, how
Yep.
can we support ourselves so that we can show up in a different way the next day? So I want to talk a little bit about your journey through motherhood and career progression, because there are a lot of these narratives and awarenesses that come into play as we develop as humans and as moms and as career women. So what were some of the really loud narratives for you as you kind of went through your motherhood journey, and how did you support yourself through them? Did you have somebody that you were working with yourself? Were you kind of learning through these in real time? Like, how did you support yourself through this progression?
So my daughter just turned 2 a few weeks ago, and there have been these different stages of motherhood already for me, right? Like how I thought about motherhood while I was pregnant was very different to those first, few days and weeks and months. And
Yeah.
then it changed again as she got older and as we got a bit more used to her and
Yeah.
used to parenting. And my husband and I are constantly reassessing. I think I'm like an over communicator. I'm that person who, if he's like looking out the window, I'm like, what are you thinking about? And he's like, nothing. And I'm like, what do you mean nothing? I'm always thinking about something. And usually it's like
My
one,
mind's always going.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like a big part of motherhood has actually been teaching me how to slow that mind down. I
Mm.
used to really equate that hustle culture with success. For me, one of the greatest learnings that I've taken in the last few years is like, I've used motherhood as an opportunity to redefine who I am and what I want out of life, specifically for my career. And I really value that slowing down. And I really value the perspective that you get when you do slow down. And slowing down is not a bad thing, right? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be a bad thing, but so often we see it portrayed as a bad thing. And so while I was pregnant, there had been two women on my team that had previously gone on maternity leave. One of them went on maternity leave and came back, and she took an extended leave. And then when she did come back, she was pregnant again a few months later, and she never came to any team things. And she was getting constant calls from daycare, like, pick up so and so, they're sick. And then the next week it'd
Yeah.
be the other one. I recognize now, and I've had this conversation with her, she and her husband had decided that she was going to be the one to leave work early when daycare called. And they had decided
Mm.
that because of the type of job she had and the type of job he had, and the perception or the reality of flexibility. And I say
Yeah.
perception because a lot of the times women will say my job's more flexible, but I literally coached a woman who was a doctor and her husband was a lawyer. And she's like, my job's more flexible. And I'm like, aren't you seeing patients all day? Yeah, but if I have to move something, and I'm like, okay, he's not a trial lawyer. He's doing contracts. Certainly his paperwork can wait, but it's not my
Yeah.
place to tell her that.
Sure,
It's
sure,
my
sure.
place is to basically mirror back to her and say, like, is it really that your job is more flexible, or that you are choosing flexibility and that you are choosing to be available when you need to be available for your family?
Mm.
Totally
Yeah.
fine either way, but being conscious of that perception of flexibility, being conscious of the inherent bias that oftentimes comes along with it. And so I give the example of my coworker because I feel terrible now, and I have ever since becoming a mother, because I judged her. Because I judged
Mm.
her commitment to her work, to her clients, to her own success, thinking, well, she's worked really hard to get to this point. How could she just throw it away now that she's a mom? In comparison and in contrast to one of my other colleagues who went on maternity leave like a year later and came back, and like you wouldn't have even known that she was a mother. Yeah, she'd talk about her child every now and then, but for the most part, like she was guns blazing, really
Mm.
wanting to prove to herself and to the business that she could do it. And I remember when I found out I was pregnant, like I mentioned earlier, the day after getting a promotion, crying to my manager, being like, I can't believe it. Do you even still want to promote me? Like, how am I
Yeah.
going to do this job and travel around Australia and again, achieve the things that I want to achieve, be the top salesperson in APAC, like go to like our sales incentive club trip, like do all of these things. How can I do that? And he's like, just because you're a mom doesn't mean like you died. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, but like
Yeah.
I didn't really know very many women that were doing it the way I wanted to do it, or that I thought I wanted to do
Yeah.
it at the time. And so I
Yeah.
spent a lot of my pregnancy time period just reading a variety of books that were not your typical, like, what to expect when you're expecting type books. They were more like Eve Rodsky's Fair Play. They were more like Emily Oster's books around like the data around parenting and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
then really finding some of the more reflective, flowery is like the kind of like the adjective I'll use, mindset work and coaches that would help me think about that experience differently and thinking about it as an opportunity as opposed to a setback. Like we
Yes.
wanted to be parents. And
Right.
I question myself now. I used to think that I always wanted to be a mother. And I've since asked myself, after working with Amy Taylor Kabaz, who is like one of the leaders in matrescence worldwide, is it that I wanted to be a mother always, like since I was growing up, since I was a child? Or is it that I wanted that because that is what was expected of me?
Ah.
And
Mm-hmm.
especially having my own daughter now, I'm super conscious of like what toys are bought for her. How do people talk to her? What are the expectations of like when she's handed a baby doll? It's like, that she's super kind and sweet and gentle with the doll, but I'm like, here's some Matchbox cars, like, wreck them up
Yeah.
against the wall. And it's like, oh, that's not very ladylike. Or, when she's playing with the doll, it's like, oh, she'll make such a good mom. I kid you not. Yesterday, someone stopped us at the park and said to me, because she saw my daughter pushing her baby doll in the swing, and said, oh,
Yep.
she'll make such a good mom one day. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that, really.
Yeah.
But in my head, I'm like, why do we think that? Right. And then her next one
Yeah.
was this woman who I don't know was like, or, baby number 2, she'll be really good with baby number 2. And I'm like,
The assumptions.
what? Yeah. The assumptions are just all wrapped up. And so to make a
Yeah.
very long response to your question, I think the top 2 things I'll say that have helped me up until now have been
Yeah.
the knowledge of matrescence, the studying of it, the unpacking of it, the constant curiosity of my own thoughts and experiences and questioning them from a compassionate perspective for myself, and mindset work, constant mindset work. I got certified as a life coach and a mindset specialist. And it is really that curiosity that makes a world of a difference into how we see ourselves and how we live our lives. Like, are things happening to us or are they happening for us? Right?
Yep.
Little changes in the words that we choose, that impacts our thoughts,
Yep.
the way that we perceive our existence and our experiences. It's like, when I have a hard day as a parent, like I say to my husband, I was like, today was freaking hard, right? Like, this is what was so hard about it for me, or this is what I hated about it. Like, and he's like,
Yeah.
wow. But like, for me, it's super important to say it out loud and to put it out there. And I do have a journaling practice as well that is fairly consistent. And I write down things that, I'm grateful for, but also what's shitty about right now. And I constantly go back to like, well, what's the best that can happen? I used to be very much like, what's the worst that can happen? But I'm like, what's the best? What's the best that can happen? And like that reprogramming,
it's amazing.
I think puts a lot of things into perspective in motherhood.
Yeah. So I think about my own personal experience in relation to that. And it's like, there's a part of me, and I think I'm an over communicator as well. I think my husband would agree with that. I tend to talk a little bit too much about my feelings. He's like, okay, can we just take a minute? What about my feelings? I'm like, okay, we can talk about your feelings if you want. But I think about it and I say to him, I'm like, she's so easy for you. Because I find that my daughter reacts differently to my husband than to me. She is a thick-headed child. I love her to death, but she is me. She is me. And I look back and I think about my days. And I'm like, today was so hard. I spent 45 minutes running after her, trying to pin her down so I could change her dirty diaper. 45 minutes. And she thought it was hilarious. And then I'm like, see, honey, like it took you like 2 seconds to change that diaper. Like, can we just be appreciative of how easy she is for you? And I take a step back and I recognize that the goal is not to make him feel bad that it's easier for him, but it's for me to take a step back and say, if I actually think about where that's coming from, for me, it's like, okay, I think that I'm not doing good enough, or I'm not being the right type of mom to get her to lay there for me and all those things. And I am doing my absolute best to take a moment to reframe it, to say that this is actually the narrative that I need, so I can remind myself that I am good, regardless of if she laid down and let me change her diaper in minute 2 versus minute 45.
Yeah.
Regardless of if that happens or when that happens or who says what or who believes what, I'm actually still good enough. And I always was good enough. So it's the reframe of how is this presenting itself for me to kind of take some of that pressure off and some of those expectations off of us, because boy, is it heavy if it's not.
Absolutely. And I'd be actually curious to know from your perspective, like, when did you start thinking that way? When did you start recognizing that?
So I have been doing quite a bit of inner work for the last, I would say 2.5 years now. So before I got pregnant, I actually got pregnant after I had started working with this coach. And we did a lot of work around that from a career perspective ahead of time, because I knew we were going to try and get pregnant. And there was a lot of fear around the parts of me that I was going to lose. So we started doing that mental shift and that reframe right at the beginning, right at the get-go, around different situations that came up. Wasn't necessarily the motherhood piece of it just yet. And I'm still working with her to this day. So it was actually something that came from me around like a career change. I actually left my corporate job before I became pregnant. because I had started to feel just a lot of physical resistance in my day to day. So that's where that started. But it lent itself so loud in the motherhood piece. It was like, to me for a while, I kept saying to her, I was like, I thought we dealt with this. I thought we dealt with this. Like, why are we still here? And she's like, it's just another layer. It's never going to be gone completely. It's just how we reflect on it and how we deal with it and how we navigate it from there. So it is quite remarkable how sometimes it just feels like you're looping in circles, but you're actually still doing the work. And you will always be doing the work, right? There's always going to be these outside stories and these outside narratives, but it's manifesting itself again in motherhood of this, am I doing enough piece?
I think like, look, motherhood, and especially that entry into motherhood is a really big kind of like milestone for a lot of people in life, right? But any sort of transitionary period, changing jobs, moving, a death in the family, a terminal illness, like these are all things that require a change in perspective. And I often find that when I'm speaking to women one-on-one or in group coaching, a lot of the times they'll say like, well, this just feels so hard. It's so challenging. I've never done anything like this before. And it's like, well, let's think about the hard things you've actually done in your life in the past.
Yeah.
And one of the exercises I have them do is like writing down all of the hard things that they've ever encountered and that they've overcome. And then I'm like, I don't want you to leave out the things that you quote unquote failed at, that got too hard, that you let go, because in reality, you still learn something about yourself during that process. And so it's like, when you know that you have the ability to do hard things, when you have someone else there to remind you of your capability, you know, that spark that you have to still persevere.
Yeah.
That's how you start to become more conscious of like your actual resilience. Sometimes you just need it spoken back to you, someone to remind you to say like, well, actually, like you're a badass, like you can do this. And it's creating that sort of belief in yourself, or rekindling it, which I think is one of the biggest challenges that women seem to have, especially as they're preparing to go back to work, especially if they've taken any sort of career break or they are changing directions in their career. They really lack that confidence. They're really saying like, I just don't have the skills I need to be this person that they think I am, or that they need me to be. And they start questioning it. And I'm like, well, you know, imagine if you created a LinkedIn profile that listed out all of your accomplishments as a mother and all of the things that you do. It's like you're constantly keeping someone alive. You're constantly feeding them, or you have been a food source for them. Like you are potentially handling the household finances. You're an operation manager. You are the people manager. You are like logistics champion, whatever the case might be. Like the skills that you learn in motherhood or in parenting can really be very, very, they can cross over to any number of professions.
Yes.
But for some reason, we don't see it like that. We don't talk about it like that. Like, I can't tell you how many people, when I came back from maternity leave, said to me, like, how was your break? How's your time off?
Oh.
And I was like, I would not describe it as that. And it could have been because in Melbourne, in Australia, where I lived, like we had one of the longest, like strict lockdowns in the world.
Yeah.
But it did not feel easy. And it did not feel easy to go back to work, never even make it into the office because we went back into lockdown a few days later, and was still trying to make it onto my morning team meetings after being up multiple times a night, breastfeeding.
Right.
And, or like with a sick child or whatever the case might be. And my husband and I trying to go back and forth between the two of us of like, oh, can you move that meeting back? And is that a Zoom, like with video, or can you just like hold the child and like turn your video camera off? Like you just start to kind of bargain in those situations.
Yeah. How do you respond in situations like that to someone that says something to you? Like, do you pick and choose your battles, so to speak, or do you try to reframe that for them? Because I think that's a big thing too. It's right. It's like, that is the expectation. And if we push that under the rug, we're kind of allowing that perception to perpetuate a little bit. So how do you respond to somebody that says that to you?
It depends on the person. And so like, I think that the thing that surprised me most about it was how often it was other women that would say that. And, you know, if I knew that they had taken any form of leave or that they were mother themselves, I would say back to them like, well, you know, it wasn't a vacation, right? Like you've been there.
Right.
And then they'll laugh and they'll be like, haha, but everybody else is going to ask you if it is. And so they themselves are playing into that assumption. And for other people, I got to the point, the first few times I didn't really know how to respond. then I started getting really angry because I
Yeah.
realized like, oh, they think this is a
Yeah.
joke. Like they think like I was truly, hanging my hat sitting by the pool for the last year. And I just started saying to people like, it wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a vacation. It was really hard. I learned a lot about myself. I'm grateful to have had the time to ease into this role, this new job, this new identity,
Yeah.
but it's not over. And it's a
Yeah.
constant, learning curve. And that's the thing with like motherhood or parenting. It's like just as soon as you figure out like that particular age, that your child's in, something changes. Their
Something.
personality is evolving. And I'm sure, our parents can probably say the same for us. So for me, yeah, the response is a bit, it's dependent on who says it, but I do try to make it a teaching moment without sounding like an asshole. Because I
Yeah.
also recognize that after saying it so many times, I feel like I'm condescending and being like, how could you possibly think that it was a holiday?
Yeah.
If that kind
Yeah.
of anger and resentment seeps through, because it makes me
For
angry that
sure.
like, oh, this is a societal expectation and pressure that we love every minute of it. And then we must be
Yeah.
so happy to feel so
Mm.
lucky to have had this time with our beautiful little child or children. And it's like, it's hard. It's hard. And I do think, as I said before, I think social media is changing a lot of that. I think a lot of people are choosing to show behind the scenes that are not beautiful, Pinterest worthy setups. And I think that
Yeah.
that goes a long way in normalizing the conversations, and people are opening up to each other to say, like, I'm really struggling.
Yeah. And that ultimately is the hope of this platform as well, is to kind of share some of those, because I found that there was a real need for me to hear the other stories, because I didn't want to be in this little pod by myself where I was the only one who felt that this was it and I was never going to make it out and that there had to be
Yeah.
something better, but I couldn't figure out how to get there. So with that, we're going to wrap it up shortly, but if you had one place for a woman to start who is listening to this conversation and feels that she wants to start making an awareness change, or she is going back to work soon after having a maternity leave, or wants to get back into the workplace after being a stay-at-home mom for, X number of years, or just wants to kind of expand her current scenario, where do you recommend these women start? Is there a book that absolutely changed your world? Is there a podcast that tends to lighten things up for you? Is it a journaling practice? Like, where do you recommend that somebody starts with this?
Oh man, Emily, that's like Pandora's box.
Sorry. Unleash it.
Yeah, look, it depends on the person's level of awareness. And I say that because I do think that in my experience, there are women that think motherhood should be hard. They think it has to be hard. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, they don't really want to explore how it could be different for them. They're not super interested in
Yeah.
that sort of adopting motherhood as an opportunity for self discovery
Yeah,
and
there's a
growth
level of
sort of
martyrdom.
aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're happy to do that. And look, I don't think that you're asking the question for those people. For me, one of the books that really kind of changed my perspective as to like why it felt so hard is Amy Taylor Kabaz, her book, which is called Mama Rising. She's an ex ABC journalist turned author and matrescence activist herself. And I studied under her for just about the last year and a half. And so she talks about matrescence in a really beautiful way, where her podcast, which is called Happy Mama Movement, as well as I'd highly recommend it. It's super digestible. She's got some people that share their real life stories, but just talking about how matrescence changes the way that we see ourselves, our environment, our
Yeah.
careers, our bodies, so on and so forth. The other person who is incredible and also has a podcast is Nikki McCon. Nikki's also Australian based. She's another big, big, big matrescence focused podcaster. Her podcast is currently called Dear Mama, but it is changing. But if you just search Nikki McCon, McCahon,
We'll link it too.
and
So we'll make sure we
yeah,
get it there.
beautiful, beautiful. And also any of the work by Dr. Sophie Brock. So Dr. Sophie Brock is a motherhood studies sociologist. My background
Mm,
is in sociology and I'm a certified motherhood studies practitioner, but really for anybody that's really interested in the sociological side, on the side that wants to understand really how the world that we live in impacts how we feel about motherhood and mothering and how others see us, her work is brilliant. She's really at the forefront of like showcasing motherhood studies as a real academic avenue of study but
Mm.
also makes it really, really easy to comprehend the theories behind it. And I think between Amy, Nikki, and Sophie, the three of them really are kind of like, I don't know, the archangels of matrescence and motherhood. But
Yeah.
on the flip side, I would also say like any mindset work. I've worked with Brianna Hunter. She's on Instagram as Miss Mindset. She's incredible. The mindset work that she helps women with is just, I would say, second to none. She studied directly under Bill Proctor herself. And I think a lot of what she talks about is like money mindset. And that's a
Yeah.
really, really powerful thing for women and mothers in particular to talk about, because so much of that is tied to shame. So much of that
Yeah.
is tied to our own stories of being women and being devalued and doing work which is unpaid, and how we
Mm-hmm.
value or don't value motherhood, or how others don't. So I would say like those are some really good starting points for just getting a better understanding of like, how can I start this journey or pick it up wherever you're at? And the number one thing I would say is like having that self-compassion as you start to have awareness for these thoughts, right? When you
Yeah.
start to feel overwhelmed by them or getting angered by the patriarchy, very dirty word right now, right?
Yeah.
Like that self-compassion, that kindness towards ourselves makes a world of a difference as we go through that inner healing, as you talked about before, and not having judgment and really kind of talking to yourself the way you would like your best friend. You know, if your best friend messed up or was feeling awful, you're not going to go back to them and be like, yeah, Kim, you are a jerk. You're going to be like, well, you're having a tough time right now, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So that self-compassion is just so key as we start to chart the uncharted waters and figure out what we actually want out of our own lives. And I really believe that when we are looking and thinking about something like our careers, we can in 2022, like we can reimagine our careers. We can help reimagine the workplace. We can start thinking outside of the box to figure out like, what is it that we truly want to do with our time,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what it is, and figuring out ways to make that work. But it's like we have to
Yeah.
decide for ourselves what we actually want our lives to look like before we start trying to figure out what work needs to look like. And so for me, ultimately, it starts with that
Yeah.
curiosity and that kindness, and just asking the questions so that we can say, you know what, I don't have all the answers. It's okay that I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to open that door and walk through it and take that journey.
Yeah. I love that. I think there's so much to be had for just asking the internal questions and getting curious about where our motivations are coming from and what really inspires us and gives us pause even too is so powerful. So I love all of those suggestions. Thank you. We will absolutely link them. I'm going to pick up probably a copy of all of those myself, add them to my ever growing reading list because that never seems to get done. But maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to carve out some time for that in my day to day as well. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me and sharing the story and the insights and awareness that you have. Before we wrap it up here, I just want to give you a quick opportunity. How can our listeners find you? How can they work with you? What is the best way for them to engage?
Yeah, amazing. They can find me on my website, which is www.madetomotherco.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as Andrea Bombino, or on Instagram as Made to Mother Co. I currently have one-on-one coaching services on offer, and I'll be opening up the spots for my group coaching program, which is going to be an amazing container, a small group of women over the course of 8 weeks, which is coming up. So if anybody is interested in that, they can shoot me a message either via the website or on Instagram or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome. And when does that group program waitlist open? Is it open now so anyone listening can take a look at it, or when does that open? We'll make sure we get this live for you.
Yeah. The group program is called the Motherhood Collective, and there is a wait list right now that they can sign up for on the website. And we're probably going to go live with the actual offer right at the end of August. Oh, no, I'm sorry. End of July. I'm like looking at my
Okay.
calendar. End of July, beginning of August, so that we can kick off around
Great.
mid-August, and it's going to run for 8 weeks. But it'll be a
Amazing.
mixture of like some online modules so that people could do it on the go. There's an app coupled with the actual live group sessions, which are really,
Mm,
really magical and bring women together from all around the world to talk about motherhood, to talk about career, to talk about expectations, and
yeah.
really to get clear on mindset and vision for the future for themselves. So I'm really excited about that offering.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link to that as well. So let's make sure I'll get that from you. And Andrea, thank you again for being
Thank
here.
you so much.
You're welcome. And I hope we can continue this conversation and we'll stick along for the journey.
Beautiful. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please help us out and leave a review wherever you listen, and consider sharing with your friends. If you're interested in learning a bit more about the project or want to share your story, please visit our website linked in our show notes below.